The first wave hit the American lines at 22:15 on ours. Private Deer didn't think. He simply raised his M1 Garand to his shoulder and began firing. Crack, crack, crack. The rifle bucked against him in steady rhythm, the gas-operated action cycling automatically with each trigger pull. Brass casings arced through the darkness, glinting in muzzle flash. One shot, two, three, four. The Garand never stopped. He just kept his cheek welded to the stock and squeezed. Around him, the entire American line erupted in a storm of semi-automatic fire that sounded like a continuous roar rather than individual shots. Every foxhole became an automatic weapon position. Every rifleman delivered the firepower of a light machine gun section. Lieutenant Yamamoto heard it before he understood it. A wall of sound unlike anything Japanese intelligence had described. The Americans weren't firing volleys. They weren't pausing to work bolts. They were simply pouring bullets into the charging mass of his regiment. He raised his Type 38, aimed at a muzzle flash, and pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked. He immediately worked the bolt, up, back, forward, down, chambering the next round. By the time he had cycled the action, the American he'd aimed at had already fired 6 more times. The mathematical reality became undeniable within seconds. Japanese soldiers fell in waves before reaching bayonet range. The doctrine that had carried them through China, close rapidly, accept casualties, overwhelm with spirit and steel, collapsed against continuous fire. Men who had trained to win with Bushido discovered that courage cannot outrun bullets, and bayonets are useless against enemies who never stop shooting. Yamamoto's loader handed him a stripper clip, 5 rounds. He fumbled it in the darkness, fingers slick with humidity. The clip fell into the mud. Around him, soldiers struggled with the same choreography. Bolt up, insert clip, strip rounds down, remove clip, bolt forward, bolt down, aim, fire, repeat. Every motion took time. Every pause meant the Americans fired 3 more shots. Private Deer's Garand went ping, the distinctive sound of the en-bloc clip ejecting after the 8th round. 3 seconds later, he had slammed in a fresh clip and resumed firing. He didn't know how many men he'd hit. He just kept shooting at movement, at shadows, at the screaming mass that seemed to dissolve before reaching his position. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. The Japanese charged again and again. Each time, the semi-automatic firestorm cut them down with industrial efficiency. What Japanese commanders had imagined as a decisive night assault became a slaughter. Not because American soldiers were better warriors, but because they held better weapons. By dawn, Henderson Field was littered with bodies and spent brass. The technological gap between 1905 bolt-action design and 1936 semi-automatic innovation had written its lesson in blood. Japan had sent brave men armed with fine rifles into battle against a nation that had industrialized killing itself. The Arisaka was a superb weapon for the last war. But this was a new kind of conflict, and Japan had just learned what happens when tradition meets mass production. The weapon that devastated Japanese forces at Henderson Field didn't emerge from military genius or battlefield necessity. It came from the obsessive perfectionism of a quiet Canadian immigrant working in a Massachusetts armory. John Cantius Garand arrived at Springfield Armory in 1919 with a singular vision: create a rifle that soldiers wouldn't have to think about. For 17 years, he refined, tested, failed, and rebuilt until January 9, 1936, when the U.S. Army made history by adopting his design, making America the first nation on Earth to issue a semi-automatic rifle as standard infantry equipment. The genius lay in elegant simplicity. When a soldier pulled the trigger, the 30-06 Springfield cartridge ignited, launching a 150-grain projectile at 2,800 feet per second with 26 or 56 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. But Garand's innovation didn't stop at the muzzle. A small port near the end of the 24-inch barrel captured a portion of the propellant gas and redirected it backward through a gas cylinder. This pressure drove an operating rod that unlocked the rotating bolt, extracted the spent cartridge case, ejected it clear of the action, cocked the hammer, and chambered a fresh round from the 8-round en-bloc clip, all automatically. The shooter never touched the bolt, never broke his sight picture, never interrupted his rhythm. Pull trigger, fire. Pull trigger, fire. Pull trigger, fire. A trained rifleman could deliver 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute, triple the rate of any bolt-action rifle in existence. The 8-round en-bloc clip could be reloaded in under 3 seconds by a practiced soldier, the distinctive ping of the ejecting clip becoming the signature sound of American infantry combat. The development hadn't been easy. Early prototypes used a primer-actuated system that proved catastrophically unreliable. Garand originally designed the rifle for the .276 Pedersen cartridge, but General Douglas MacArthur intervened in 1932, insisting on the more powerful .30-06 to utilize existing ammunition stockpiles. The decision delayed production by years, but ultimately proved fortuitous. The .30-06's excellent long-range performance and devastating stopping power made the M1 Garand not just faster than bolt-action rifles, but harder hitting. By the time American forces landed on Guadalcanal, the transformation was complete. Every infantry division, every rifle company, every frontline soldier carried the same revolutionary weapon. The Marine Corps received 22,000 M1 Garands per month by early 1943. Springfield Armory was producing 1,000 rifles daily. Winchester added 600 more. America had industrialized semi-automatic fire. Other nations had experimented with self-loading rifles, the Soviets with their SVT-40, the Germans with the Gewehr 43, but these remained specialized weapons issued in limited numbers. Only America had the industrial capacity, quality control, and logistical infrastructure to arm an entire infantry force with semi-automatic rifles and keep them supplied with ammunition across 2 oceans. The M1 Garand wasn't just a rifle. It was a force multiplier that transformed every American soldier into a walking automatic weapons platform. And Japan's bolt-action infantry was about to discover exactly what that meant. The Arisaka rifle was not inferior. This must be understood clearly. Colonel Nari Akira Arisaka's design, first adopted in 1897 and refined through decades of combat experience, was a masterpiece of traditional rifle engineering. Post-war testing would prove the Arisaka action stronger than the American Springfield, the British Lee Enfield, or the German Mauser, capable of withstanding chamber pressures that would destroy lesser weapons. The bolt design incorporated an innovative gas escape system that protected the shooter in case of a ruptured cartridge. The safety mechanism could be operated silently, a critical feature for ambush tactics. Japanese manufacturing tolerances were tight, the metallurgy excellent, the craftsmanship meticulous. The Type 38, adopted in 1905, fired the 6.5 by 50 mm cartridge with a 139-grain bullet at 2,500 feet per second, generating approximately 1,650 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. Its exceptional 31.4-inch barrel, one of the longest ever fielded, delivered remarkable long-range accuracy. Japanese snipers could reliably hit targets at 600 yards, and the mild recoil allowed for precise follow-up shots. The Type 99, introduced in 1939, represented Japan's attempt to modernize. Chambered in the more powerful 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge, it fired a 182-grain bullet at 2,400 feet per second with 2,300 foot-pounds of energy. The shorter 25.9-inch barrel made it more manageable in jungle combat. Both rifles featured robust construction, reliable feeding from 5-round stripper clips, and the kind of battlefield durability that kept them functioning in the worst conditions the Pacific Theater could offer. These were proud weapons, symbols of Bushido, extensions of the samurai spirit, reliable, accurate, strong, and completely obsolete. The fatal limitation wasn't quality, it was concept. Both Arisaka variants were bolt-action rifles designed for the warfare of 1905, when infantry combat still meant volley fire at 300 yards, bayonet charges decided battles, and spiritual fortitude mattered more than industrial output. The 5-round magazine seemed adequate when enemies used the same technology. The manual bolt operation, up, back, forward, down, was perfectly acceptable when everyone cycled their actions the same way. But Japan had frozen its small arms development in a tactical doctrine from another era, while the world moved forward. Worse, the introduction of the Type 99 created a logistical nightmare. By 1942, Japanese forces fielded 2 different rifles requiring 2 different cartridges, 6.5 by 50 mm for the Type 38 and 7.7 by 58 mm for the Type 99. Second-line troops, garrison forces, and naval infantry units still carried the older Type 38 at war's end, creating ammunition distribution chaos that only worsened as supply lines collapsed. Japan recognized the problem too late. In the final years of the war, they attempted to develop the Type 4 rifle, a semi-automatic design clearly inspired by the M1 Garand. Only approximately 100 were ever built before surrender. The Arisaka wasn't a bad rifle. It was an excellent rifle trapped in the wrong war, carried by soldiers whose commanders believed that courage and steel could overcome industrial firepower. Henderson Field had already proven that assumption catastrophically wrong. Now the rest of the Pacific would learn the same lesson. The numbers tell a story that courage cannot rewrite. Between 1936 and 1945, American factories produced approximately 5.4 million M1 Garand rifles. Springfield Armory led production with 3.5 million units. Winchester Repeating Arms Company contributed 513,880 rifles. By January 1944, Springfield Armory alone was producing 1,000 rifles per day, every single day, with Winchester adding 600 more. Peak monthly output exceeded 40 Bison rifles flowing into the supply chain with mathematical precision. Every M1 Garand met the same uncompromising standard: minimum 5-inch grouping at 100 yards or rejection. Interchangeability of parts between manufacturers was strictly enforced through detailed specifications and gauging requirements. A damaged rifle from Springfield could be repaired in a Guadalcanal armory using parts salvaged from a Winchester-manufactured weapon. The adoption of improved heat treatment processes in 1942 actually increased receiver strength over pre-war production. Quality never declined. It improved. American rifles leaving factories in 1945 were superior to those produced in 1941. The switch from blued steel to parkerizing improved corrosion resistance in tropical environments, a practical upgrade, not a cost-cutting measure. Walnut stocks gave way to birch due to shortages, but functionality remained unchanged. Late-war simplifications like stamped trigger guards were thoroughly tested before implementation. American industry had perfected mass production without sacrificing performance. Japan's production told a different story. From 1905 to 1945, Japanese arsenals manufactured approximately 3 million Type 38 rifles across multiple facilities. Koishikawa, Kokura, Nagoya, and Mukden Arsenal in occupied Manchuria. Type 99 production from 1939 to 1948 reached roughly 3.5 million units from 9 different arsenals, including facilities in Manchukuo and Korea. The numbers seemed impressive, over 6 million rifles total. But Japan never achieved the production rates necessary to fully modernize their infantry. By 1943, quality began collapsing under resource shortages and bombing campaigns. Late war. Type 99 rifles exhibited crude workmanship, rough machining marks, simplified sights, substitute materials, elimination of the monopod and anti-aircraft sight. Some final production rifles featured wooden butt plates instead of steel. Manufacturing tolerances loosened. Arsenal marks became irregular. The ammunition situation descended into chaos. 2 different calibers, 6.5 by 50 mm for Type 38 rifles and 7.7 by 58 mm for Type 99s, created impossible logistics as supply lines stretched across the Pacific. Garrison troops on bypassed islands starved for ammunition, while warehouses in Japan held millions of rounds in the wrong caliber. Units couldn't share ammunition. Resupply became a nightmare of mismatched cartridges and incompatible weapons. Meanwhile, American supply ships delivered standardized .30-06 ammunition by the millions of rounds to every theater, every island, every foxhole. 1 rifle, 1 cartridge, 1 unbroken supply chain stretching from Pennsylvania factories to Peleliu beaches. Industrial superpowers don't fight fair. They fight with factory capacity, quality control, interchangeable parts, and logistics that never break. Japan brought warrior tradition to a production war, and Henderson Field was just the beginning of a mathematical inevitability written in steel and assembly lines. Henderson Field was only the first lesson. The Pacific became a 10,000-mile classroom where Japan learned the same brutal truth on every island, in every jungle, across every coral reef. Guadalcanal established the template. Japanese after-action reports described American rifle fire as Tuchie Rerukoto no Nai Dan Mo, an unbroken curtain of bullets. Officers reported that banzai charges, which had shattered Chinese lines for years, now collapsed within seconds against what survivors called a wall of lead that never stopped. One Japanese sergeant wrote, "We charged with the spirit of the emperor. We died before reaching their positions." The Americans never ceased firing. Saipan, June 1944. The largest banzai charge of the Pacific War, over 4,000 Japanese soldiers surged against American positions in a desperate night assault. U.S. Army reports documented the outcome with clinical precision. Every rifleman became a one-man machine gun section. The M1's rate of fire allowed individual soldiers to engage multiple targets without breaking defensive positions. Enemy forces were neutralized before achieving contact. Translation: they were slaughtered. American Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, firing his M1 Garand until the barrel glowed red, personally killed dozens of attackers. His Medal of Honor citation noted he continued firing despite wounds until his position was overrun. The Garand's firepower allowed single soldiers to hold against overwhelming numbers, something bolt-action rifles could never achieve. Peleliu, September 1944. The terrain shifted from jungle to coral ridges, but the firepower disparity remained constant. Marine Eugene Sledge described the M1's psychological impact. The Japs feared it. They knew we could put out sustained fire that their bolt actions couldn't match. Every Marine was like a light machine gunner. Japanese defensive positions, meticulously prepared in limestone caves, collapsed not because American tactics were superior, but because 8 rounds of semi-automatic 30-06 delivered more lead downrange faster than Japanese defenders could respond. Cave-clearing teams advanced behind walls of continuous fire. Suppression became devastatingly effective when every rifleman could deliver 40 shots per minute. Okinawa, April 1945. The final proving ground. Japanese soldiers captured late in the campaign told interrogators that American rifle fire had become Kongbu no Yin, the sound of terror. They described hearing the distinctive, rapid crack-crack-crack of M1 Garands and knowing they faced impossible odds. One captured officer stated, "We were told our spirit would overcome their material advantage. It was a lie." A soldier with a bolt-action rifle cannot defeat a soldier with a semi-automatic rifle. The mathematics are simple. We died, and they survived. American combat reports from Okinawa confirmed the strategic impact. The M1 Garand provides overwhelming tactical advantage in all engagement scenarios. Enemy forces employing bolt-action rifles demonstrate consistent inability to achieve fire superiority. The Pacific had become a laboratory of industrial warfare. Every island proved the same equation. Semi-automatic firepower multiplied by mass production equals victory. Japan's courage was never in question. Their rifles simply belonged to a war that had already ended. The Japanese military establishment saw the problem. They understood the mathematics. They simply refused to believe material could triumph over spirit. Japanese infantry doctrine, codified in the Senjin-kun, Field Service Code of 1941, explicitly elevated spiritual strength above technological advantage. The code stated, "The power of the Imperial Army lies in its moral superiority. Weapons are merely tools. The warrior spirit is the true weapon." This wasn't propaganda. Japanese officers genuinely believed it. The result was a training regimen that allocated disproportionate time to bayonet drill. Japanese soldiers spent hundreds of hours perfecting bayonet techniques, thrusts, parries, charges, practicing on straw dummies until the movements became instinctive. The Type 38 and Type 99 rifles were designed with bayonet lugs as essential features, not afterthoughts. The doctrine assumed that superior hand-to-hand combat skills would decide battles once armies closed to contact range. But M1 Garands ensured Japanese soldiers rarely reached bayonet range alive. The cognitive dissonance became unbearable. After Guadalcanal, after Saipan, after Peleliu, Japanese military intelligence delivered detailed reports on American semi-automatic rifles. The evidence was overwhelming. The solution was obvious: develop a comparable weapon. In 1944, Japan attempted exactly that. The Type 4 rifle, clearly inspired by captured M1 Garands, represented Japan's acknowledgement that bolt-action infantry was obsolete. The design incorporated a gas-operated system, a 10-round detachable magazine, and fired the 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge. It was functional. It worked. It could have closed the firepower gap. Approximately 100 were built before the war ended. 100 rifles against 5.4 million American M1 Garands. The failure wasn't technical, it was industrial and philosophical. Japan's manufacturing capacity, already strained by aircraft production, naval construction, and resource shortages, couldn't support mass production of a complex semi-automatic rifle. Factories that should have been producing Type 4 rifles were instead turning out thousands of bamboo spears for civilian militia use, a decision that perfectly encapsulated Japan's ideological paralysis. Even more revealing, the Type 4 program received low priority. Resources went to projects aligned with traditional doctrine: improved bolt-action rifles, more bayonets, better swords for officers. The semi-automatic rifle was seen as a Western crutch, a technological shortcut that undermined the warrior ethos. Japanese Lieutenant Tadashi Koga, writing in his diary after examining a captured M1 Garand, captured the tragedy. This weapon makes every American soldier superior to our finest marksmen. Yet our commanders tell us to rely on spiritual strength. I have seen spiritual strength die to 8 rounds of automatic fire. We cannot win this way. He was killed 3 days later on Okinawa, charging an American position with his Type 38 Arisaka and fixed bayonet. Japan's cultural devotion to Bushido had become a trap. They couldn't abandon the doctrine that defined their military identity, even when that doctrine guaranteed defeat. Technology didn't just defeat tradition at Henderson Field. It revealed that clinging to tradition in an industrial age was a form of national suicide. War reduces to arithmetic when stripped of sentiment. The Pacific battlefield became a proving ground for equations written in foot-pounds and rounds per minute. Individual firepower analysis. An M1 Garand firing at combat tempo, 40 rounds per minute, delivered 106,240 foot-pounds of energy downrange every 60 seconds. Each 30-06 cartridge generated 2,056 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, multiplied by sustained semi-automatic fire that never required the shooter to break his sight picture or interrupt his rhythm. A Type 38 Arisaka, operated by a highly trained soldier achieving 20 rounds per minute, delivered 33,000 foot-pounds of energy in the same time frame. Each 6.5 mm cartridge generated 1,650 foot-pounds. But the bolt-action mechanism, up, back, forward, down, consumed precious seconds between shots. The ratio, 3.2 to 1. Every American rifleman delivered more than triple the kinetic energy of his Japanese counterpart. The Type 99, with its more powerful 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge, improved the equation slightly, 46,000 foot-pounds per minute at 20 rounds per minute. Still less than half the Garands' output. Squad-level calculations. A standard U.S. Army rifle squad. 12 men, 12 M1 Garands. Collective firepower, 480 rounds per minute. 1,274,080 foot-pounds of energy delivered continuously. This assumed combat tempo, not maximum rate of fire. In desperate circumstances, that number could double. A Japanese rifle squad, 13 men, 13 Arisaka rifles, mix of Type 38 and Type 99. Collective firepower, 260 rounds per minute. Approximately 520,000 foot-pounds of energy with constant bolt manipulation. American squads outgunned Japanese squads by a factor approaching 2.5 to 1, before accounting for machine guns, BARs, or supporting weapons. Accuracy under fire. U.S. Army Ordnance testing in 1943 measured combat accuracy at various engagement distances. The M1 Garand, fired from prone position at 100 yards, achieved 5-inch groups when operated by trained infantry. The semi-automatic action allowed shooters to maintain consistent cheek weld, breathing rhythm, and trigger control across multiple shots. The Arisaka rifles, tested extensively post-war, demonstrated excellent mechanical accuracy, 3 to 4-inch groups at 100 yards from a bench rest. Superior to the Garand in pure precision, but combat isn't fired from bench rests. The critical factor was sustained accuracy. M1 Garand shooters could deliver 8 aimed shots in rapid succession without losing their sight picture. Arisaka operators had to break position with each bolt cycle, reacquire targets, re-establish breathing, and re-aim. Each interruption degraded accuracy and consumed time while targets moved, returned fire, or disappeared. Reload analysis. M1 Garand. 3 seconds to reload. 8 rounds via en-bloc clip. Type 3899, Arisaka, 8 to 10 seconds to reload 5 rounds via stripper clip. Under field conditions, longer if the shooter's hands were wet, cold, or shaking under fire. The verdict: mathematics doesn't recognize courage. Physics doesn't honor tradition. The M1 Garand delivered 3x the individual firepower, 2.5x the squad firepower, faster reloads, and maintained accuracy under sustained fire. Japanese soldiers weren't inferior warriors. They were inferior-equipped warriors, and in industrial warfare, that distinction is fatal. The Arisaka was doomed not by design flaws, but by immutable physics and production capacity meeting on a battlefield that rewarded bullets per minute over Bushido. General George S. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. History proved him correct. The M1 Garand didn't just win the Pacific War, it rewrote the global understanding of infantry combat. Every major military power that had dismissed semi-automatic rifles as unnecessary luxuries reversed course after 1945. The Soviet SKS, the German G3, the Belgian FAL, the American M14, every post-war battle rifle traced its conceptual lineage directly to John Garand's revolutionary design. The lesson was undeniable. Nations that equipped their infantry with semi-automatic rifles won. Nations that didn't lost. The most striking validation came from an unexpected source: Japan itself. During the post-war occupation and the establishment of the Japan Self-Defense Forces in 1954, American advisors equipped Japanese units with donated M1 Garand rifles. Japanese soldiers, some of whom had faced these weapons from the wrong end on Pacific Islands, now trained with the rifle that had defeated them. The irony was profound. The weapon they had feared, that had mowed down banzai charges and rendered their bolt-action doctrine obsolete, became the foundation of Japan's modern military small arms training. Japanese military historians, writing in the 1960s, acknowledged what wartime propaganda had suppressed. American rifle superiority was decisive in individual combat engagements. The Type 38 and Type 99 were fine weapons rendered obsolete by industrial innovation we could not match. American veterans required no convincing. Marine Eugene Sledge, who carried his M1 through Peleliu and Okinawa, wrote, "That rifle saved my life more times than I can count. 8 rounds, semi-automatic, never jammed, never quit. The Japanese had good rifles, but we had the Garand." Army veteran Paul Fussell stated it more bluntly. The M1 gave us a firepower advantage that was almost unfair. Every American soldier could shoot like a machine gunner. That's why we won. The production numbers tell the final story. 5.4 million M1 Garands manufactured during World War II. Over 200,000 saw service in Korea. Thousands more equipped Allied forces through the 1960s. The rifle remained the standard U.S. infantry weapon until 1957, 21 years after adoption, and saw combat in Vietnam with specialist units as late as 1963. No battle rifle in history served longer or fought in more theaters. Henderson Field was the proving ground, but the M1 Garand's impact resonated across decades. It established the template for modern infantry warfare: semi-automatic fire, intermediate cartridges, detachable magazines, and the understanding that industrial production determines battlefield outcomes as decisively as tactics or courage. Japan learned this truth in blood across the Pacific. The Arisaka rifles were well-made, accurate, strong, and completely outclassed by a weapon that understood warfare had evolved beyond bolt-action tradition. The greatest battle implement ever devised didn't win through superior marksmanship or warrior spirit. It won through mathematics, mass production, and 40 rounds per minute of industrial firepower that tradition simply could not answer. 8 rounds. Semi-automatic. Victory.